This is the Music Halls of Fame podcast. This week, we honor the year in music for 1987, along with a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1987. We also make the case for putting Devo into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Plus, our Spotlight Museum is the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Before we get going with the podcast, like everyone tells you, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you'll know when these podcast episodes drop, which is usually every Thursday. Now, on to this week's episode. The year was 1987. In music, alt-rock continued its journey from college radio to mainstream, thanks in part to the influence of MTV. Bands like Husker Du, Dinosaur Jr., and Sonic Youth began to break through a little, and if you hung out in your local record store at that point, then you might have heard the rumblings of some bands in Seattle called Soundgarden and the Melvins. The hair band era got jump-started by Bon Jovi, whose second album, Slippery When Wet, became a mega-selling album and unleashed a ton of copycat bands. Nikki Sixx of Motley Crue was clinically dead after a heroin overdose, but was revived by paramedics. In country music, Randy Travis had the biggest album of the year with Always and Forever. Other artists with big albums that year included Alabama, Hank Williams Jr., George Strait, Reba McEntire, The Judds, Restless Heart, Dolly Parton, Linda Ronstadt and Emmylou Harris, and Dwight Yoakam. Artists with big country singles included Randy Travis with Forever and Ever, Amen, Michael Johnson, The Judds, Dan Seals, Reba McEntire, Merle Haggard, Highway 101, The Forrester Sisters, Roseanne Cash, and Ricky Van Shelton. Hip-hop continued creeping up into the mainstream as LL Cool J, Boogie Down Productions, Eric B. and Rakim, and Public Enemy made noise. LL's second album, Bigger and Deffer, was released, which had the first hip-hop ballad to become a hit, I Need Love. And it also had his iconic song, I'm Bad. Public Enemy debuted with their album, Yo Bum Rush the Show. Kool Moe Dee had How You Like Me Now. Heavy D and the Boys had Mr. Big Stuff. Eric B. and Rakim had the legendary Paid in Full and also Move the Crowd. Ice-T had the album Rhyme Pays. Boogie Down Productions had Criminal Minded. Audio 2 released Top Billin', and Eazy-E released the song Boys in the Hood. Dance music on the charts was still populated by pop and R&B artists like Madonna, along with Jody Watley, ABC, George Michael, and Janet and Michael Jackson. There were big one-hit wonder dance tracks like Yellow's Oh Yeah from the Ferris Bueller's Day Off soundtrack, and Paul Lekakis's classically titled Boom Boom Boom, Let's Go Back to My Room. Seriously, that was the title of the song. Generation X would like to apologize to you now for that one, although I'm not going to lie. The song is actually pretty catchy. You should check it out. Anywho, if you were in Chicago or Detroit, then you were probably hitting the underground clubs like the Warehouse in Chicago to listen to two forms of dance music that were going through the club scene, house and techno music. The Warehouse, by the way, is how you got the name house for house music. If you were in Great Britain, though, then you already felt the tremors of EDM as Steve Silk Hurley's song Jack Your Body became the first house track to hit number one on the British charts. Also, freestyle group Exposé broke through to the mainstream when their song Come Go With Me hit number one, while Company B hit number one with the song Fascinated. 1987 was also the year that Kraftwerk hit the top of the dance charts in America. In Latin music, the biggest artists of the year were Jose Jose, Juan Gabriel, Braulio, Emmanuel, Jose Feliciano, Los Buques, Los Tigres del Norte, Little Joe, Vicente Fernandez, and Los Yonix. Bands that formed in 1987 included Alison Krauss and Union Station, Alice in Chains, Animal Logic, Third Base, 808 State, The Bullet Boys, Danger Danger, Danzig, Diggable Planets, Digital Underground, After 7, DC Talk, Delirium, Bad English, Blues Traveler, Femme Fatale, Fugazi, Calloway, The Gin Blossoms, Green Day, Guy, Giant, Inner City, Jagged Edge, The Jungle Brothers, Kid and Play, The Jesus Lizard, Meat Beat Manifesto, Mars, Lunachicks, The Roots, Ugly Kid Joe, and a little band at the time called Nirvana. Bands that called it quits, at least until the inevitable reunions, or took the official hiatus status, included the Bay City Rollers, Baltimore, Berlin, the Mary Jane Girls, Modern English, Nena, the Smiths, GTR, General Public, Husker Du, The Violent Femmes, Twisted Sister, and the aforementioned Mars, who put out one album, had a worldwide Eurodance hit called Pump Up the Volume, Dance, Dance, then broke up, all in 1 year. Bands that actually did the reunion thing in 1987 included the Doobie Brothers, Leonard Skinner, and Prism. MTV Europe started in 1987, as did Kylie Minogue's career when her version of the song The Locomotion became a big hit. Whitney Houston became the first female solo artist to debut at #1 on the Billboard Albums charts when her sophomore album Whitney was released. Elton John had throat surgery that left his voice lower. The single, or cassette single if you will, made its debut in 1987. The first single to be released was Bryan Adams' song Heat of the Night. Another big music business event also happened on November 18th when CBS Records was bought by Sony Music for $2 billion. U2 released the Joshua Tree album in 1987. Michael Jackson released the album Bad. Prince released Sign of the Times. Pink Floyd released their first album without Roger Waters called A Momentary Lapse of Reason. Def Leppard released Hysteria, and Guns N' Roses released Appetite for Destruction. All of those albums were huge and are iconic for the year. George Michael's Faith, INXS's biggest selling album, Kick, and the Dirty Dancing soundtrack also came out in 1987, but they came out very late in 1987, just in time for the Christmas season, and those successes were mainly being felt in the year 1988. The top 10 best-selling albums of 1987, at least according to Billboard magazine, were Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet, Paul Simon's Graceland, Beastie Boys' License to Ill, Bruce Hornsby and the Ranges' The Way It Is, Janet Jackson's Control, U2's The Joshua Tree, Huey Lewis and the News' 4, Cinderella's Night Songs, Anita Baker's Rapture, and Genesis's album Invisible Touch. The top 10 best-selling songs, according to Billboard, were The Bangles' Walk Like an Egyptian, Hearts Alone, Gregory Abbott's Shake You Down, Whitney Houston's I Want to Dance with Somebody, Starship's Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now from the Mannequin soundtrack, Robbie Neville's C'est La Vie, Whitesnake's Here I Go Again, Bruce Hornsby and the Ranges' The Way It Is, Bob Seger's Shakedown, and Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer. Musical artists who were born in 1987 include DJ Afrojack, rappers Meek Mill, Kendrick Lamar, Wiz Khalifa, Bow Wow, Justina Valentine, Jay Park, and Dougie Pointer of McFly. Singers Frank Ocean, Aaron Carter, Diana DeGarmo, Kevin Jonas of the Jonas Brothers, Marcus Mumford of Mumford & Sons, Dan Reynolds of Imagine Dragons, Brendan Urie of Panic at the Disco, Tyler Hubbard of Florida Georgia Line, Dan Myers of Dan and Shay, Kesha, and Jesse McCartney. Musical artists who passed away in 1987 included Paul Butterfield of the Paul Butterfield Blues Band, the founder of the New York Blue Note Jazz nightclub, Alfred Lyon, entertainer extraordinaire Mr. Liberace, guitarist Bola Sette, singer Dean Paul Martin Jr., French singer Dalida, cellist Jacqueline Dupree, bassist Jaco Pastorius of Weather Report, considered the greatest bassist of all time, by the way, drummer Buddy Rich, Maria Augusta Von Trapp of the Von Trapp family of Sound of Music fame, singer Maxine Sullivan, drummer Carlton Barrett, and guitarist Peter Tosh of Bob Marley and the Wailers, who was murdered in a home invasion. For the Grammys for Music for 1987, U2 won Album of the Year for The Joshua Tree. Paul Simon won Record of the Year for Graceland. Somewhere Out There from An American Tale soundtrack won Song of the Year, and Jody Watley won Best New Artist. At the MTV Video Music Awards, Peter Gabriel's legendary Sledgehammer won Video of the Year. At the American Music Awards for the music of 1987, Whitney Houston, Paul Simon, and Bon Jovi were the big winners. Hank Williams Jr. won Entertainer of the Year at the Academy of Country Music Awards. Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, and Levert were the big winners at the Soul Train Music Awards. The Billboard Music Awards, they didn't actually start until 1990. At the Eurovision Singing Contest, which was held in Belgium that year, Johnny Logan from Ireland won for the song Hold Me Now. At the Tony Awards, Les Miserables won Best Musical, and All My Sons won Best Revival of a Musical. Musically, at the Academy Awards, The Last Emperor won Best Film Score, while I've Had the Time of My Life from the Dirty Dancing soundtrack won Best Song. The Pulitzer Prize for Music was shared between John Harbison for The Flight into Egypt and Stephen Albert for Flower of the Mountain. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony was held on January 21st, 1987 at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York City. At the ceremony, record executives Ahmet Erdogan, Jerry Wexler, and Leonard Chess, along with record producers Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, were all inducted into the non-performers category. Louis Jordan, T-Bone Walker, and Hank Williams Sr. were inducted into the early influencers category. In the performers category, Aretha Franklin became the first woman to be inducted into the hall. Other performers who were inducted into the category included the Coasters, Bo Diddley, Marvin Gaye, B.B. King, Bill Haley, Carl Perkins, Clyde McPhatter, Smokey Robinson, Muddy Waters, Jackie Wilson, Big Joe Turner, Rick Nelson, Eddie Cochran, and this next artist. The Caruso of Rock, the Big O, the man with the trademark sunglasses and all-black everything outfit. In an era where every rock and roll singer was trying to show how much of a man he was, Roy Orbison wasn't afraid to show you his vulnerable side, with his silky smooth voice doing all those ballads. In short, he was the Drake of the early rock and roll era, without the really whiny side. I mean, seriously, Drake, would it kill you to man up a little and stop whining in your songs? But I digress. Roy Orbison was born in Vernon, Texas on April 23, 1936. When he was 6 years old, he was given a guitar. Roy started playing in a band called the Wink Westerners, who played country songs and also had their own local radio show. When he finished high school, he went to North Texas State College. His idea was to study geology so that he could work in the oil fields if music didn't work out. Once he heard that fellow North Texas State College student Pat Boone had gotten a record contract, he resolved to do the same thing. He ended up transferring to Odessa Junior College. While there, he and what remained of the Wink Westerners started playing dances on the weekends and also had a local TV show. One day, Johnny Cash stopped by to perform on the TV show. He suggested that the group audition for Sam Phillips at Sun Records. When they did, Sam turned them down flat. Around this time, though, Roy and his band got a better TV gig with a much bigger station. They changed the name of the band to the Teen Kings. And since Sun Records didn't take them, the group decided to record a song that Roy had written a few years earlier while at North Texas State College called Ooby Dooby. Once they released it on J. Well Records, the song did well. It also got noticed by Sam Phillips, who only months earlier had turned the group down for a recording contract. But this time, since they had a hit, Sam said yes. The Teen Kings re-recorded Ooby Dooby for Sun Records, and the song went to number 59 on the Billboard singles chart. The group ended up splitting up, but Roy decided to stay at Sun Records and go solo. After becoming angry with the way his career was going at Sun, he went on tour with Patsy Cline, then quit performing to concentrate on songwriting at songwriting firm Acuff Rose. Rose eventually brought him to the attention of Monument Records after he had written and re-recorded a couple of songs with his writing partner at the time, Joe Melson. Monument Records was where Roy would become a huge star. Between 1960 and 1964, Roy put out classic songs like Only the Lonely, Crying, Dream Baby, Blue Bayou, Pretty Woman, In Dreams, and more. There are at least 2 songs of his that are considered to be among the greatest songs ever recorded in rock and roll history. The first song, Crying, was written by Roy and Joe Melvin in 1961. The song is one of Roy's signature operatic ballads. It was released in July of 1961 and went to number 2 3 months later. Don McLean did a cover version in 1980 that went to number 6 on the country chart and ended up being his second biggest hit of his career, right behind the classic American Pie. Roy also did a duet of the song with country music singer Katie Lang that became popular in the 1980s and also won a Grammy Award. Oh Pretty Woman was written by Roy along with his new writing partner Bill Dees. Things went south between Roy and Joe Melson because Joe wanted to concentrate on his own solo recording career. Roy got the idea for the song from an encounter with his wife Claudette. Legend has it that as Claudette left to go somewhere, Roy asked if she had enough cash. Bill Dees, who was there at the time, said, quote, "A pretty woman never needs any money," end quote. And that gave them the idea for a song. 40 minutes later, the song was set. The growl in the song, by the way, was inspired by a growl that Bob Hope classically did in movies. The mercy came from when Roy actually missed a note while recording the song, so they decided to actually just make it part of the song. The song was released on August 29, 1964. It went top 10 in 15 different countries and went number 1 in 11 of them, including America. It also sold over 7 million certified physical copies. In 1982, Van Halen did a very popular remake of the song for their album Diver Down, which went to number 12 on the pop charts. In 1989, Roy's publishing company, Acuff Rose, sued the Two Live Crew for copyright infringement, claiming that the Two Live Crew's parody of Oh Pretty Woman was not included in the fair use doctrine. The Supreme Court ultimately decided the case in 1994, saying that the Two Live Crew's parody fit into the definition of fair use. It ended up being one of the landmark copyright law cases in Supreme Court history. In the late 1960s through the 1970s, Roy's career started to decline as tastes in music shifted to artists like Jimi Hendrix and The Who. Tragedy also struck his life as well around that time. His wife Claudette was killed on June 6, 1966, when the motorcycle she was riding struck a pickup truck. While Roy was on tour in England in September 14th of 1968, Roy's house in Tennessee burned down, unfortunately killing 2 of his sons who were there at the time. In the 1980s, Roy found stardom again, or rather, the world rediscovered Roy's brilliance. Cover versions of his songs started making the pop charts, including Don McLean's version of Crying and Van Halen's version of Pretty Woman. His song In Dreams was used in David Lynch's movie Blue Velvet. Of course, at the tail end of the 80s, there was the movie itself, Pretty Woman, that used the song a lot, since it was actually named after the song, and thrusted Julia Roberts into superstardom. In 1987, Roy performed at the Coconut Grove nightclub in Los Angeles, California, with esteemed musicians like Bruce Springsteen, Jackson Browne, and Bonnie Raitt. The concert became the Cinemax concert A Black and White Night. 1988 would end up being extremely important in Roy's life, both for the good and for the bad, unfortunately. First, he got together with Jeff Lynne of ELO, or Electric Light Orchestra, Tom Petty, George Harrison, and Bob Dylan to form the group The Traveling Wilburys, who had the big hits Handle Me With Care and End of the Line. Roy was in the middle of a big comeback that year. Only a year earlier, he had been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Late in the year, though, while on tour, Roy started having chest pains, but kept working. On the evening of December 6, 1988, Roy Orbison suffered a severe heart attack and passed away. He was 52 years old. In January 1989, his new solo album, Mystery Girl, was posthumously released. His song, You Got It, became a huge hit off of that album. Roy released 22 albums while he was alive, and his estate released 3 more after his death, including his chart-topping album, Mystery Girl. Mystery Girl was, in fact, his only top 10 studio album in America. He also put out 92 singles. 9 of those hit the top 10. Crying and Oh Pretty Woman were his 2 biggest hits. Roy won 6 Grammy Awards over his career, including a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1998. He received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame in 2010. He is the 37th greatest artist of all time and the 13th greatest singer of all time, both of those according to Rolling Stone magazine in a survey. Presented for induction by Rock and Roll Hall of Fame class of 1999 inductee Bruce Springsteen, Roy Orbison, inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987. Before we get to the rest of the podcast, we'd like to tell you about our other podcast, the Music History Today podcast. Every day we tell you what happened on that date in music history, along with music releases, birthdays, and passings. So, if you like this podcast and want more music history, then please search the Music History Today podcast in audio or video form on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast from. This week, we're going to make the case for putting Devo into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. To the tail of the tape we go. Devo released 9 studio albums. Of those, 3 went to the top 30. 1980's Freedom of Choice went highest at number 22. In Great Britain, Freedom of Choice went to number 5, while 1981's New Traditionalists went to number 3. As far as their singles went, they released 25 singles. Of those, 7 of those went top 40 in America, with 3 of those going to the top 10. Even though their commercial success was so-so, there's a few reasons why they are worthy of induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. First of which is that they were one of the first bands to combine punk rock with new wave to create their own sound. With their innovative sound to go along with their quirky, humorous lyrics, the band's style was soon copied by a lot of 80s bands. Plus, their influence was felt on MTV. I mean, who can forget their music video for their biggest hit, Whip It? Whip It Good. The reason against them getting in? Well, there's only so many slots that are going to be filled, so someone has to lose out eventually, I suppose. The group has been nominated a few times before, but it seems kind of stupid to keep nominating them and also a group like the New York Dolls a bunch of times, and only to not let them in year after year after year after year. Regardless of how many times they've been nominated in the past, which seems to be a yearly thing these days, Devo deserves to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame at some point, because 80s music wouldn't be 80s music without them. This week's Spotlight Museum is the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. The museum itself is located on the National Mall, right across the street from the Washington Monument, in fact. The museum highlights the experience and contributions of African Americans to specifically America, but more broadly the world. A lot of the museum deals with slavery and civil rights. There's, for instance, a slave cabin, an airplane that was flown by a member of the Tuskegee Airmen, as well as items pertaining to the military, as well as religion, literature, and politics. The museum also has an extensive collection of artifacts concerning music. The museum boasts stage costumes, for instance, worn by Parliament Funkadelic and many others, along with other recordings, sheet music, photos, and such. And there's also a great online resource on their website, where they've put a lot of their collection online for people to look at. The museum is open daily from 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Admission is free. After all, your tax dollars paid for it. However, the only way that you can walk into the museum without a pass is if you show your military ID. Otherwise, you either have to try to get timed passes in the mornings that you want to go, which run out very quickly, by the way, or you can get passes in advance online, of which there tends to be a waiting list unless you're a charter member. Check the museum's website, nmaahc.si.edu, for information about the time passes and updated hours of operation, as they tend to wane depending on the season. And yes, that link will, of course, be in the show notes. Chuck Berry was born on October 18, 1926 in St. Louis, Missouri. From the beginning, Chuck was interested in music. He performed during high school, but once he got out of high school, he settled into normal life, got married, and worked in an assembly plant assembling cars. He still had the music bug, though, so he started performing with the Johnny Johnson Trio, and it was there that he honed his showmanship skills, having studied what T-Bone Walker was doing on stage. One day in May of 1955, Berry went to Chicago. He happened to meet the great Muddy Waters, who told him to have a talk with Leonard Chess of Chess Records. Chess took a look at Berry. They saw that rhythm and blues was beginning to go down in popularity, and they were looking to stretch their sound into new genres. And they thought that Berry might be the person to help them do that. He had a bunch of hits in the first decade of his career, from Johnny B. Good to No Particular Place to Go to rock and roll music. Berry geared his music towards teenagers. He talked about good times, cars, girls, and fun. Typical teenage stuff. His stage act became legendary, especially when he bent down and hopped across the stage on one leg, which became known as the duck walk. He made a good living with his touring. In short, he became the template for other rock and roll artists to copy. In 1988, the Grammy Hall of Fame inducted Chuck's first big hit. Not only was it his first big hit, but it was also the first rock and roll song. Maybelline was a song that was a reworking of the song Ida Red by Bob Willis and his Texas Playboys. The song is the template for rock and roll songs. It has cars, women, and a great guitar solo. Berry used to sing it during his club gigs before he recorded it. Chess Records wanted a few changes to it, including changing the name of the song from Ida Red. Chess didn't want to get sued for using the title, after all. Legend has it that someone looked on the floor of the studio and saw a box from Maybelline Cosmetics, thought that it would actually fit the song perfectly, but added an extra L to Maybelline to get around those pesky copyright laws. You know how that goes these days. Plus, they added bass to the song in order to make it sound less like a hillbilly song, quote unquote. They also changed the melody because back then it was common practice to take songs and alter them a little without people getting too crazy about it. These days, if you did that, you were going to end up on the end of a really bad lawsuit. And also you'll probably get canceled by the social media storm that you will have on you. Maybelline was released in July of 1955 and became a big hit. It was number 1 on the R&B charts and crossed over onto Billboard's pop charts, where it went top 5. The rock and roll revolution was pretty much in full swing after that. As with most acts, with the good comes the bad, and Berry was no different. Berry was busted as a child for armed robbery. In 1962, he served 1.5 years of a 3-year sentence for transporting a minor across state lines. Some people believe that that was actually a trumped-up charge, no pun intended, by the way, based on racism. He also, later in life, got caught for tax evasion and was sued for filming women changing their clothes in a bathroom. The latter charge he denied, but settled out of court. Chuck continued to play almost 100 shows a year worldwide and then cut back to playing at least once a month at a local restaurant near St. Louis, Missouri. Chuck lived to be 90 years old, passing away on March 18th, 2017. Today, he's considered to be one of the great pioneers of rock and roll. When the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted its first class in 1986, Chuck Berry's name was front and center on the first ballot. On Rolling Stone magazine's Greatest Artists of All Time list, he is ranked at number 5. 6 of his songs made Rolling Stone 500 Greatest Songs of All Time list, with Johnny B. Good being the highest at number 7. Johnny B. Good is also the only rock and roll song that was put on the gold record of the Voyager spacecraft that is going out in outer space. I believe that has actually crossed the edge of our solar system at this point. Father of rock and roll indeed. The father of rock and roll, Mr. Chuck Berry, whose pink Cadillac you can see at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. And that is it for this episode of the Music Halls of Fame podcast. For more podcast episodes, which drop every Thursday in audio and video form, then please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio Podcasts, CastBox, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcast from.